Hi everyone. This is the Acid Left reading group, what we call the Beyond Linguistics reading group, in fact, as part of the Acid Left output. And we're reading through Ghosts of My Life. We're now on, I think, part 3 of 5 reading sessions we have. Book by Mark Fisher, as part of a wider initiative to read basically all his full books that he wrote and published in his lifetime. And we're going to basically show you some memes we made in relation to the content of these 3 chapters. So basically, Ghost of My Life is an essay book which has like excerpts from reviews, interviews, and essays generally around the theme of hauntology and mostly film, TV, music criticism, the kind of thing that Fisher did on his K-Punk blog, which a number of the texts come from. So we're going to look at these. I didn't really have many thoughts about the first of these essays that we read, which was on a musician or group called Little Axe and an album called Stone Cold Ohio, and that was compared to a film which was called Beloved, was it?
Yep, Beloved, yeah.
Okay, which Fisher reflected on.
Which is based on a Toni Morrison novel.
Okay, and Fisher reflected on that after reflecting on the Shining movie, which we talked about last time. So I didn't go into that a lot, except I did listen to some of the music, and it was very, as Fisher said, kind of harrowing, deep, melancholic blues music, which somehow kind of feels from now, but feels also like it could have been, from decades ago. I say from now, but some years ago, recently. But I didn't really have many thoughts on that. Aside from that, I did get very into the next essay, and that was on a label called Ghostbox. And Ghostbox basically is a record label that is very interested in. So just some page rustling going on. All right, I feel like a teacher. Like, stop that noise. All right, but let's stop. All right, so it's about this label called Ghostbox, run by 2 people who kind of formed it, deeply influenced by kind of weird experimental TV soundtracks and that kind of thing, and also kind of incidental music on TV and radio. And particularly they were interested in what's called the BBC Radiophonic Workshop, which is a workshop set up in 1950s by the BBC to get, it was Delia Derbyshire, a kind of experimental sound musician, researcher, I guess you'd say artist. It was kind of a vehicle for her to experiment with other people on sound effects, particularly electronically oriented sound effects and experiments. And it's her, and then later somebody who kind of took over from her, I think collaborated with her, called Daphne Oram. So 2 women who were largely responsible for the kind of the BBC sound, both in terms of sound effects and background noises and soundtracks. And so the record label kind of promotes music largely oriented around these kind of sounds. And so Fisher talked about a couple of things. He talked about actually principally the Advisory Circle, which is a guy, I forget his name awkwardly, but okay, it's a musician who basically makes music which is kind of hauntological, influenced by this kind of weird, far out TV music and elevator music, and these kind of homely but perverse sounds which are supposed to make you relax, but are kind of somehow jarring because they are kind of like the soundtrack of capitalism. And I looked up some of this. I didn't know about it. And particularly a song that Fisher talked about there called The Lonely Signalman from an album called As the Crow Flies. And it is indeed, as Fisher says, very kind of melancholic, jarring, but also comforting. And it's interesting because I didn't know much about this, but having looked it up, I was really happy that Fisher had written about it. So it kind of gives this book a purpose in that you can read about stuff you didn't know about before, which can be a bit like, you kind of get a bit stuck thinking it's hard to kind of endure this, Fisher going on and on about something he loves that you don't know anything about. But if you do kind of bear with it and look up these references, you find, some really interesting things. So that is really what a critic is supposed to do, a music critic or art critic. And I'd say Fisher has done it very well, because once you kind of get into it and look back at the text, they serve as a very useful guide to kind of bring you deeper into that music. So it's kind of changed my perception of the book, because before I thought, well, this is just Fisher, harping on about stuff he likes. And now I see it more as Fisher being a useful media critic. And that music, actually, I kind of found it went very well with what Fisher was kind of saying about it, saying that that in a way, this kind of public music, and this was paid for by the BBC, which is paid for by license payers in the UK, to people who pay a kind of compulsory fee, a fairly affordable fee to watch the TV, and it's kind of unavoidable unless you just don't have a TV or claim you just never watch it. So it's basically publicly funded, and that these publicly funded experiments result in a kind of a homely space, and in this case, a sonic kind of space. So these homely sounds that, on reflection now, kind of fill in for the public space that isn't really there. And then Fisher goes on to speak about things like Starbucks, these corporate, or rather these kind of franchise spaces that aren't really public space, but because you can kind of like rely on them being everywhere in your country, but also I guess in the Western world, they become a kind of public space, a space one can go to. But they're kind of hauntological, because I don't think he said exactly this, but it's how I kind of see what he was saying. They evoke the dream of a public space that was never really created, and they point to a future public space that may arrive. So not the corporate public space for Starbucks, but one that may become properly, communist. But something that probably never will arrive. So there's this kind of melancholy at this space where you can kind of feel comfortable, but you kind of know that it's not quite, public space at its best, but also that public space it points towards will probably never be realized. And that made me think of bus stations and train stations, and generally just buses and trains and airports, and the kind of homely feeling you get there, that it's somewhere where you can just kind of relax without any purpose, but also you still feel that that's kind of finite. So you feel you have a space at your disposal you can do anything with, but you feel severely impeded at the same time. So that contradiction is kind of push and pull between, I can relax, I have nothing to actually do, I'm here at the airport for 5 hours, but then that kind of thing of like, I can't really do what I want. I kind of can, but there are limits on my use of this public space. So I think, that is very much how, we deal with space in a capitalist country, or, that's the best that public space gets, is one that poorly mimics what public space was supposed to be. And then you have to bear in mind that a lot of these public spaces that we see, that we experience, are really based on utopian models or kind of far out 60s experiments of left governments in the West, 50s and 60s experiments, when the welfare state was a big deal, and there was kind of this pressure to please the masses and conceive of a better world after World War II. So there is a definite kind of hauntology of a real intention to provide a communitarian space that was somehow lost, but the degree to which we have it at all, we still owe to those 50s and 60s experiments. So I think it was kind of useful to read that and to relate to that coming out of Fisher's reflections on this music, which is based on the sounds of kind of a public experimental sound workshop program kind of thing. So then the next essay, it was on this guy called John Brooks and a project he has. There was an interesting name, which I just have to find here. Well, there was at least an album by him, I think, called Music for Dieter Rams. I forget the name of the project. It may just been under his own name. Anyway, this guy, John Brooks, made this album, which is kind of similar. He talks about how he's interested in ambient background music, the music that's played in shops, this kind of being on the edge between relaxing and moving on. You're supposed to relax in a shop, but you're supposed to always kind of hurry at the same time. And so he makes this music which very much reflects that. This music for Dieter Rams is based on also the design of Dieter Rams, who designed a lot of products for the company Braun, who make household products, but also radios, record players, etc. And we actually have the first meme here, which is based on the "What Vibe Do I Give Off" meme, which started in 2020 and which has recently taken on this new form, which is a Wojak variation of the "What Vibe Do I Give Off" meme. So basically you get a number of people. So your point is that you choose, like, I'm one, and then D, and then the dollar sign at the end. So you would be like it's the, what's he called, Doomer Boy Wojak, Ghost of My Life, and the Braun. It's a Braun electric shaver, I think. So that would be the kind of vibe you give off. So I mean, in this one, obviously I've chosen Fisher books because we're talking about Fisher, and these Braun things. They're mostly radios of some kind, and a record player and a shaver, because I'm thinking of this Dieter Rams guy functionality, and how functionality kind of feels homely, but also it kind of feels kind of harrowing, because these functional objects contain within them the barbarity of capitalism. So you can kind of relax with your shaver and record player and whatever, but you kind of you relate them to labor conditions and money or lack of money, etc., etc. So that's kind of what I was getting across in this meme, and that's really most of my observations. And I have another meme, but any points from you?
Yeah, I really like those last two essays that you mentioned as well. That you said you got more out of. I was unfamiliar with a lot of that stuff, and had to look it up and listen to it. But what really struck me was that idea of like really beautiful music and stuff like that, which has really come back now in even more accessible ways since this book has been written. Like there's a whole new genres of music that kind of mimic that sound of easy listening music, elevator music. But as the guy says, it's actually really well constructed stuff. Like it's, the theory behind it and the composition is solid. It sounds beautiful. It's played with precision. It's not, this picture of really generic music. It has its own purpose and it's being recognized now. And just that realization of thinking that this stuff was composed to, be around you all the time, but for you to somehow not notice it. And then when you hear it again, or something that likens back to it, the physical and emotional response that you go into. I really liked his in all three of these essays, this speaking about how you emotionally respond to this stuff, linked to early childhood memories and stuff like that. Like the way public service announcements really speak to a kid. The way that when you're older, public service announcement is something, but when you're a kid, those public service announcements that come on seem to hold some kind of otherworldly weight and authority to them. And the music that happened to be paired with them and the visuals and styles really affect, you growing up. And I think that's what he's like, talking about, and how experimental it was during the 70s versus maybe now as well. And I wanted to also give my vibe here. I'm gonna pick my vibe. It's hard for me to pick y'all's vibes. But I'm gonna say that I am 2C at symbol. That's my vibe.
Okay, yep. I guess
I don't know if
yeah,
Ernesto wants to give
really
his vibe.
disagree with it, but okay,
Right.
Ernesto.
Oh yeah. I'm just letting everyone know. That's how I
We'll
feel
see what
today.
people say. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree, Mike, that Fisher somehow, through the criticism in these essays that he wrote, he creates a kind of phantasmagorical public space that we can all share. I think, Adam, like you say, that he brings together a lot of the emotional reality, right? Something that I think we all shared in one way or another. You mentioned public service announcements, right? In Mexico, we have our own brand of public service announcements. They were given over TV, right? And they had their own jingle, right? Their own narrator, familiar voice, right? For all of us in Mexico now, right? I'm sure you guys had your own local experience. And I think what Fisher really, how he, I guess, brings forward this public space, right? How he kind of makes it real is that he gives us, I guess, by example, kind of a material criticism of the conditions, right? Of the specific conditions that he's talking about. He usually tries to speak of the economics, right, behind whatever artist or phenomenon, right, he's examining. And somehow that kind of feels like an exorcism, I guess, right? Of kind of like dispels a little bit, makes it easier to talk about, and I guess kind of reclaims it a little bit, right, for us to share. And I guess if I had to choose a vibe, I would go for a 5 C exclamation point, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I can kind of agree, but I don't know why I'm agreeing. But I also don't see how I can really,
disagree either. Yeah.
I mean, I agree a bit more with Adam's one.
Okay.
But I have another meme as well, which I don't think is. I don't know how if it's really. Yeah, I mean, it was thrown together. It's a line from those essays. It's a line from those essays. Actually, I don't remember the exact context, but I mean, it's a similar kind of thing that we're talking about objects and spaces that are functional. Public spaces or private spaces, but I just like the line. I just thought, taking out of context, you could put it with all kinds of things. So those objects and spaces are also functional. So I suppose this is kind of funny. It's like the really hideous end of capitalism, just like these bizarre things that also involve labor exploitation, which are absolute crap. Somebody's still like working in China for $18 a day, probably even good in a factory in China. I don't know. But in working in terrible conditions, even I don't know how much they're paid would buy them. Probably not much. But anyway, working in crappy conditions, but just to make the stuff, which is, these kind of things that you end up owning. I don't know how many of these things you guys own, but these things that
I'm not gonna answer that.
These things or similar things like you don't really get any particular joy out of them. They're kind of just annoying, you know what I mean? But sometimes you can't throw them away either for some kind of whatever reason.
Right.
The thing that somebody like worked doing this, built, you know, making this stuff, so you could own it but not really want it, you know. It's kind of bizarre, but that wasn't even what I was thinking when I made it. That just suddenly just came into my head. I don't know why. Not that I'm saying it's even good that it came in my head, but yeah, I was just reflecting on bizarre stuff. Yeah.
Well, it's I really enjoy this meme. So at first I just laughed because I thought it was absurd, but yeah, then staring at it, and you know, the more I think about it, it really, really is absurd, because we do have, especially in America, and I imagine a lot of Europe, the UK is like this as well. You're filled with junk objects like this. These are trash. Although I have played with the squirrel thing and it was pretty fun for about 5 minutes. But you know, it's obviously
what
trash.
What is that for? That squirrel thing, what's it for? I didn't work that out.
It's to put on your hand and to make your hand into a squirrel.
So what happens? But does that mean you can then attract squirrels?
You could do, yeah, you could try that. But there is a function to these, like, you know, obviously they are bought, people do use them.
But the cushion is like it's sequins, but then you like touch it and it becomes Nicolas Cage.
Yeah, so you know how like there's like two sides
some
of
kind
sequins.
of thing of sitting on it as well and leaving a butt print on his face?
Yeah,
That's
definitely.
something that people do.
Yeah, more than that, I'm sure. Yeah.
More than, yeah. But it also really reminds me of Zizek's first big book, The Sublime Objective Ideology. He talks about the now famous toilet example. And it gets a laugh from people because it's like, what? Philosophy about toilets, easy introduction to Zizek. But his ultimate point there is that ideology itself is actually embedded in things that we would think of as utilitarian objects, like actually functional and just useful. Like those things are already always within an ideological construction. And he uses like this idea of toilets, like how the waste is exposed, to talk about like broader ideological things in different cultures, like the French where the poop disappears right away, German where it sits, where it's easily accessible, or the Anglo toilets where it floats, so you can't really expect it, but it doesn't go away.
I don't know. I wonder about the characterization because I've been to all three countries and I don't know.
Yeah. I think these are older, I think, but not necessarily. I don't know how the designs work, but that's his example, at least.
Right.
And yeah, and the way that we think of, you know, beauty and stuff and aesthetic design, like the radios and the shavers and stuff, like they really do affect something, and they do already have like assumptions about the way the world is working. And of course, they're unconscious things. These aren't like intentional design mostly. But it also then makes me think of some interviews I've read of Fisher where he talks about one of our big projects, how it should be to create public spaces that are extremely beautiful for that purpose. So that like when one is outside, they're experiencing the city as an aesthetic project that is designed for them, for all. And so like I could see the connection to this line of thinking back here when, you know, thinking of elevator music, or the way logos are designed, or the way the record player looks.
Right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. I just think I like seeing that connection there.
Encore. No, but that's fine. I was getting distracted by tech for a second, but I think there is. I can very much see Fisher's link between between functional spaces and public spaces, elevator music, and the kind of crap we have in our houses.
Yeah, I find it interesting that a lot of the ambient streams lately are, I mean, first of all, the phenomenon, right, of ambient streams on YouTube, so popular right now, lo-fi. You know, there's lo-fi versions for each country. There's like there's like a lo-fi Brazilian girl, a lo-fi Mexican girl, right? And they all use music from their own countries, right? And I found recently that there's even a Minecraft like ambient, so you can. So it's like if you had a computer and left Minecraft on, but you can do it on YouTube now, right?
That's amazing. Minecraft at 2 a.m. from the other room, right? Something like that. It's like your brother's playing Minecraft in the other room. So this meme I made, this is a still from Beloved, the movie. And I thought it was interesting, Mike, that you said that one didn't affect you as much. And I wonder if it is a cultural thing, because this is a very American thing that Fisher is writing about, which is unusual for him, too. I saw Beloved, the movie, when I was a freshman in high school, a few years after it came out. And just randomly, it was in a movie collection. I picked it up, put it in, did not know what to expect. And I found it incredibly disturbing. And it is a disturbing film. And it's a very American film. So what it says here, which is like a reworking of something Fisher says, is Beloved is a horror movie. American history is a horror. So in Beloved, you have a family that lives in a house that's haunted, a mother and a daughter, and the house is haunted by the woman's dead baby. A man moves in, and he and the mother form a relationship, and they exorcise the ghost. Everything starts getting really nice. Oh, and this is very important for this. These are Black Americans shortly after the time of slavery in America. In some sections crossing in slavery and outside and shortly afterwards. So they this house that they live in is all right. So the man sorry about this. The man comes back into the house. The ghost leaves, and then shortly after, when everything's starting to go nice for the family, a woman shows up, like that's 18 years old, that clearly has some stuff wrong with her, and she says her name is Beloved. And you shortly learn after that she is the embodiment of the dead child, the ghost that was excised. And you find out throughout the film that she was killed by her mother when her mother escaped slavery and knew that the master was coming to get her and her children back. So she says no and slits her infant's throat. And then is caught and is only able to kill one child. And she says, like, if I hadn't killed them, they wouldn't have lived. And so that's what this movie and book were about, is this deep trauma of slavery in America. And it's a really disturbing movie. I recommend it, honestly. It's been a while since I've seen it. So reading this again kind of brought all that back into me. And the first time
thank you for that. Because I didn't know really about the movie, much about the movie, apart from what Fisher said. But didn't he say that people were complaining, like, it's a horror, like it should be categorized as a horror? And he said, well, yeah, it's a horror, but that's because American history is a horror.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's what confused me. In that case, what was it categorized as, if people were saying it should be a horror?
It's presented kind of like a drama, but it has really surreal moments, and it is horror. Like today, I think it would probably be cast as a horror film. But at the time,
I suppose that is the point, though. That I haven't seen it, but I'm just guessing now that it's not horror, because they're supposed to be pointing to, this is like the reality of America.
Well, Well, it is horrific. Like the woman, there's lots of scenes that it's more a psychological horror film, but it wasn't presented that way. It was presented like a drama about motherly love and the horrors of the Southern American Black experience. But they
Yeah,
didn't in the
I'm just
trailer
thinking that, like,
show how horrific it was going to
yeah, I'm just
actually be.
thinking that, yeah, but I'm thinking like in that way, if you have a horror that you say it's a horror, and then it's like about American history, slavery, etc., then you're almost saying that that's fantastical. Whereas if you don't present it as a horror, and then that stuff ends up being like the major subplot of the film, then you're not, then you're making it somehow more real. You're giving the audience less chance to discount it. I mean, I haven't
Yeah.
seen the film, but I'm just like hypothesizing.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking of it in the way like films like Us have tackled this recently. In Us,
Yeah.
you have that same kind of dynamic. It's actually, I didn't make that connection until just now. But it kind of brings that up too. It's like the ghost of trauma coming back. But in Beloved, it's just a lot more pointed, I think, and specifically about the way the slave women were treated, where motherhood and daughterhood was basically not allowed, through the separating of families and the treating of humans as animals and stuff like that. So it just really struck me, and I thought it was interesting, especially coming right after The Shining. He doesn't spend much time on Beloved. He goes into the Blues album, which I also really like too, and I hadn't heard before. But yeah, linking together like this psychoanalytic reading of The Shining as containing a lot of elements of like patriarchy and stuff like that, and then going into this, which is about the Black experience in America and this like trauma of slavery in America, and really saying like how that needs to be addressed before an actual American dream can even be thought of, while that nightmare is still there. Yeah, it's just there's more depth than people give Fisher credit for, I think. But we can go on to the next one. And this one is more silly, a little more upbeat. And this is going back on what you were talking about, Mike, just reinforcing that about the public spaces versus these third spaces of Starbucks and corporate chains and stuff like that. But there's a screen cap about this teenager who's remade MySpace and everyone's loving it, which does sound nice. But then the quote from Fisher at the bottom is, "What happened to our space or the public, or the idea of a public that was not reducible to an aggregate of consumer preferences," which I think is a really great little quote from Fisher, because it kind of takes that boomer moment that he gets criticized for a lot, sometimes rightfully, but really shows that he is trying, I think often successfully, to point to something greater than actually just oh, nothing's good anymore. Like, it's not that MySpace is bad or that internet digital space in and of itself is bad, but it's that reducing public space to the aggregate of consumer preferences, which is bad. So it has that yearning for a true public space, just like Mike was talking about at the beginning, of this way that it kind of has this implicit betterness built into it, but it's not there.
This thing of you can have anything you want, you can have it your way, like kind of a Starbucks, Burger King kind of thing, is a problem that in a sense that is maybe what we expected utopia to be, or one of the things that we would kind of think of as a feature of an idealized world, is that you can have what you want when you want. But I suppose one feature of that is you need anonymous spaces. That if you're going to provide a space in which anyone can have their coffee how they want, anyone can have their burger how they want, you can't really then pump it full of like Sepultura music, because that's just what one person wants, So you end up with this anonymous kind of dystopian spaces in contradiction. So maybe, you know, we don't really want what we want. That sounds a bit like Zizek. No, that's the kind of thing Zizek would say. We don't.
My God.
We don't really want what we want. And utopia is actually something quite different, which probably is more in line with the kind of socialist ideal of like, you're not given exactly what you want, but you're kind of, I don't know what you're given instead. I mean, this is kind of weird, I suppose, because in socialism, you're not really given exactly what you want, but kind of a level playing field. But I suppose then, you know, you end up hopefully in kind of like potentially random situations of a community type where you kind of bounce off each other and then something arises, you know, rather than the kind of capitalist utopia of you narrow down those kind of or you whittle away, you get rid of those chances for random communitarian encounters, and it's all more about you as a single cell. You can have anything you want.
Yeah. The capitalist spaces are so smooth.
Yeah.
They are, yeah.
But the thing is, I think both depend on kind of anonymous spaces. If you look at socialist spaces or things leaning social democrat type housing experiments and things in the 60s in Britain, you're really looking again at anonymous spaces. They're trying to provide a palette upon which, you know, anything else, rather a canvas makes more sense, a canvas upon which anything can then happen. So that, you know, you're giving a space for community to kind of like implant itself and grow up in a housing block, for example, with its kind of communal playing spaces or whatever, parking spaces and laundry spaces and what have you. But in the capitalist scenario, you have something quite similar. You have a space which is very neutral, but with a view instead to, you know, to satisfying the individual on terms of what they want, but not encouraging community. So there's a very subtle difference. That's probably why Starbucks and places do remind one of you know, community spaces, state community spaces, but there is this subtle difference. But I think the difference really comes in with the capitalist exchange. That's what kind of makes it disturbing, because really the kind of like left, you know, state built spaces are quite disturbing in themselves for different reasons. But it's that exchange and that, you know, you can have what you want as an individual. That's what, you know, really modifies it, because I can put up with like an anonymous kind of brutalist socialist space if then, you know, as a community you can make anything happen. You can make, you know, community flourish, and you know, you can have like community barbecues and football matches and what, you know, whatever's what, you know, whatever you want to do really. You know, I could tolerate that hard cold space, but with capitalism where you know that none of that kind of spontaneous community stuff is allowed to happen, that makes those cold hard spaces a lot more difficult to live with.
You get neon instead.
What's that?
You get neon instead.
Yeah.
Who doesn't like neon?
Yeah.
No, that's a really good point, Mike, because yeah, it is. It's almost like the places like Starbucks versus a you know, like this brutalist space that you laid out that could be flourished with community development. Yeah, I really liked that juxtaposition there, and thinking of them together, it ties that, I think, his whole concept together, you know, going back and forth. And then about this idea of not really wanting what we want, I think it's because the community space or something like that that might be blank allows you to project and build something, whereas like the Starbucks or corporate space provides something that can be wanted already, which I guess is that capitalist exchange that you were saying. Yeah, I guess that's just what you said. I had to work it out.
It's kind of what, but yeah, I agree, but principally because you were agreeing with me. But I mean, yeah, and I just think I don't know actually just literally how much we really do want something that's specifically tailored to us. I don't know, because I think when you get it, then you realize you didn't really want that. It doesn't really solve anything.
Yeah, Definitely. How many people are right now unhappy, even though they had their Mac breakfast?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, or a pumpkin latte with cinnamon on top.
Yeah, pretty expensive,
decaffeinated.
but
Yeah, we do have to say, or I have to say, it's better than being utterly isolated and alone. I do have to think of growing up, and like entering high school and shortly afterwards living in rural America, and the only like public places being Starbucks and stuff like that. So they
Yeah.
were places that kind of in like the outside times, when you're not really supposed to be there or using them in ways that aren't supposed to be, like, you know, anywhere between 15 and 20 years old, people would just like gather at these spaces like late at night and sit down and maybe get one cup of coffee right before they close, but then spend hours there outside on the Starbucks porch, talking and stuff like that. So it's like a scrap of something better. And when you are so isolated and individualized, even that little bit of scrap can feel really good. Just like old men now gather in McDonald's for breakfast and sit there, as soon as they open, the old men come and they reminisce with their buddies and tell the stories and drink coffee and eat their egg McMuffins, because there is no other space for them to do that. The public space doesn't exist in that way, so they have to get their scraps.
I think that's a very specific experience. I mean, I'm agreeing because I imagine it's true, but I've never seen that, because, like in Italy,
I have in
the
Mexico,
old
it
men
happens too.
gathering in independent, cafes.
Right? Yeah. Well,
even near McDonald's. But yeah, I mean, I could quite imagine that could happen. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I think in a lot of Europe, or at least the American idea is that, in a lot of Europe, especially Italy, you still have a lot of public space, even though
You do,
it's
yeah.
being
Except,
encroached
like,
upon.
I mean, in the UK, the thing would be the pub, but the pubs were closing at a really fast rate over the last 20 years. Anyway, like the old local pubs weren't so in demand. People were going for like trendier bars, but then they started emptying out. So I went home one Christmas to London to see some friends in the area. We all lived together before I moved to Italy. So I went back. We said, let's do the pubs like we used to do. Went to all these old pubs, and there was just no one there. And anyone who was there was on their phone, half the time, even if they were with a friend. So we just seen that in that kind of few years, the whole scene kind of got hollowed out. But now it's just, obviously with COVID and everything, it's like the death now to those kind of experiences. But I mean, the generation that would come up and populate bars, albeit maybe trendy bars that have killed off the old style pubs, they're just not going. They already weren't going to bars before COVID.
Right.
But I find that interesting. I find that they're also doing less drugs and drink, but we are getting on a different subject there. But I mean, I do find that interesting that they're maybe getting their serotonin fix from Instagram.
I mean, that doesn't sound too bad.
Yeah, that sounds okay. I think it does sound okay, because I think you got in all kinds of like trouble and situations, between 14 and 28 or something, because you were in pubs all the time or whatever on the streets somehow. And I wonder what would have happened if my generation had been on their phones instead. Also, because we were like really into making fanzines, punk fanzines on old Xerox machines. So we would have loved, memes and stuff.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. Well, those are 3 short essays. And I mean, we could talk more in depth, but I don't think it's necessary for right now. So if anyone has anything they want to like wrap up with.
No, I suppose I said it. I'm just thinking. I mean, they were 3 quite short essays, and next week we have a group talk with a few more people going over a few more essays. I think in that one we get to the one on Drake and Kanye.
Yeah, yeah,
So that would be a lot of fun. Yeah.
yeah. I
Oh,
look
yeah,
forward to listening to a lot of Drake and Kanye.
Yeah, it's gonna be good.
Set the
Yeah.
mood, you know.
Well, it's good for memes as well. Kanye and Drake.
Oh
I think.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this
Yeah.
one was a hard one for memes because a lot of people do not know these, so they don't carry that like cultural, weight. But it's also good. You're kind of performing that same thing Fisher was doing by bringing attention to these. Might not go as far, but
I think we had some
it's
good
a good
points.
work.
I think sometimes less is more.
Yeah.
And with that, I'm just going to play us out with a very short phrase from "As the Crow Flies" from the Advisory Circle, which is one of the texts, one of the music pieces we were talking about. Okay, so here goes.
Look after yourselves. Mind how you go.
That was it. Did you hear it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, bye-bye.